Great. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. We're here today to talk about inclusion, about digital inclusion. And this is going to be a little bit of a discussion, a lively discussion, hopefully. We'll be demonstrating the approach that, an approach to usability and accessibility. We hope you enjoy the show. We'll be, before we jump into introductions though, I just want to let you know what we intend to talk about. We'll first define a little bit the problem that we're trying to solve. I think that's always valuable. And we'll jump into some introductions. We won't make you wait till the end for a demo. We'll start really early with that so we have some greater context around methodologies and problem space. And then we'll have a bit of a fireside chat, if you will. We'll focus on different areas of compliance and usability. We'll talk a little bit about how accessibility and usability can be addressed in the design phase, kind of cultural fabric that is so beneficial to ensuring that we're meeting user goals and organizational goals both. And last, we have some resources and shares to keep in touch with you and help you out along the way. All right. Well, what are we talking about? Well, we're talking about inclusion. What is inclusion? Crispin, you've given this a little bit of thought? I think we think about it every day. How can you define inclusion for the audience?
Thanks, Andrew. Well, if you go to the next slide, I came prepared. I found this great definition on the Global Diversity Practice website, and I'll read it out because I think it's salient. Inclusion is an organizational effort and practices in which different groups or individuals having different backgrounds are culturally and socially accepted and welcomed and equally treated. So what does this mean? Really, this is, saying that everyone, regardless of race, religion, age, or ability, is treated respectfully and equitably. And I think equity is really the key here. First, we have to recognize that not everyone is equal in terms of their abilities. And then we can take steps to ensure that everyone is accommodated appropriately so that they can contribute and participate and accomplish their goals to the best of their abilities and feel like they matter as much as everyone else. So an example in the physical world might be, having a wheelchair ramp at the entrance to a building that has several steps to get up. Or it could be an auditory indicator at a crossing signal to indicate that the light has turned green. So really, being inclusive means thinking about how we can accommodate everyone and giving that the attention and the energy required to ensure that people are treated equitably and so that they can feel included in society and have rich, full lives like everyone else.
So well said. When we talk about digital inclusion, there's a bit of nuance here. Tanner, can you help us get a little bit more specific about what digital inclusion is?
Yeah, definitely. I thought Crispin's inclusion explanation was great. And I would like to break it down even a little bit more simpler, which is like, if inclusion is to include, what's the opposite of that, which would be exclude someone from, whatever the situation would be. And then when we apply that to digital exclusion, that would be preventing someone from engaging with a website or a mobile app or, any type of electronic communication, whatever it might be digitally. If we're excluding someone, we're preventing them from engaging with something as designed and intended, then that's what that is. And so if we're talking about digital inclusion, that means that we are, to Crispin's point, taking an active effort in making sure that our websites, our mobile apps, communications, all digital assets include, and that includes people with disabilities who might be using assistive technology, like myself, who uses a screen reader to access content on my computer, through my smartphone, and to do all different types of.
Very good. Thanks so much. Wow. I mean, who are we? I think now's the time to let people know how we came together. You know, we're here representing two different organizations. Kalamuna is a digital agency, which I'm the CEO of, and Kalamuna and AFB worked together on the latest website redesign, and we continue to build a great partnership here. I first got very interested in accessibility 15 or so years ago. There's a beautiful lab at the base of the University of Toronto, Robarts Library, which has, which had at the time so many assistive devices. My eyes were really opened at this conference at what was possible, and how we could code the web to improve accessibility and inclusion. Crispin.
Hi everyone, my name is Crispin Bailey. I'm the Director of Design and User Experience at Kalamuna. And yeah, I've been very interested and passionate and active in the web accessibility space for almost as long as I've been designing websites, which is, I don't want to age myself, but we're going back 2 decades or so. But the web accessibility aspect was really came surface for me when I was learning about the importance of semantic coding. As I was learning how to, going from a world at the very beginnings, you all remember front page, building websites used to be kind of clicky and draggy droppy. But then I realized that there was stuff going on under the hood that I needed to understand. So when I started learning about how to code the pages by hand from scratch, I learned about the importance of semantics in building that into the web pages. And then that opened the door to understanding why it was so important to have well-structured, well-coded websites. And really ever since then, my mind and my eyes have been open to these challenges. And I've been going to meetup groups and conferences and just, subscribing to all the channels just to keep on top of it, because it's such a dynamic field and it's constantly changing, and it's really important that we stay up to date on it.
Great. So my name is William Rushell. I'm the Director of Client Services and Technical Development for the American Foundation for the Blind. And AFB it's a national nonprofit, and our mission is to create a world of no limits for people who are blind and visually impaired. And in the number of the types of activities we do, we work with great agencies like Kalamuna, and we work with other companies to help guide them to digital inclusion like Tanner was describing. And so my introduction to accessibility into AFB was about 10 years ago when I started as an intern working on at AFB right in college, working on an optics lab, trying to measure the way that small displays had, the contrast that, and usability problems that can come with not having sufficient contrast on the displays that are completely pervasive in today's world. So if you can't see the display, how do you access that information? And it's a fascinating field. There's so much, like Crispin was interested in understanding the semantics of how to structure information to make it accessible to everyone. It's a fascinating set of design problems and choices that we can make to have an impact on people's lives. And it's been a pleasure to work with AFB for 10 years exploring these, exploring inclusion. So I will go ahead and pass it over to Tanner, who is my counterpart at AFB.
Hey everybody, my name's Tanner Gears, and I think success in everybody's life and careers, families, relationships, finances is critical depending upon what we do. But I really feel like true success is more dependent upon how and why we do what we do. You know, growing up, I was just a regular kid who didn't realize how great I had it. One day I woke up in the hospital as an adult, totally blind. And, you know, growing up in the Deep South, there was a lot of diversity. And I remember volunteering in the mid-early 90s at Easter Seals, and when we would bring ramps on our outings because, you know, they didn't have ramps. We'd have these wood ramps that would help get the kids and adults into buildings, and, you know, navigating bathrooms was a challenge. And, you know, I didn't understand or appreciate what that life was like until the day I woke up and I wasn't. I became that difference. And it was then when I really began to appreciate, you know, the importance of, you know, civil rights and equality with regards to disability, with regards to race, with regards to gender and sexual orientation, and how different things are for people that have these, that live a life that is different than you. And, you know, one day you have no kind of societal or professional or educational struggles. And then the very next day, you're the same person, except for this one difference. And it is sad how different the outcomes in life, in your life becomes. And so that's why I lead sales and business for AFB. People with disabilities, especially in today's world, deserve the right to have access to digital experiences, websites, mobile apps, electronic communications. They can live life independently. Yeah, that's what I do and why I do it.
Thanks so much, Tanner. Really appreciate you sharing. I think we're going to jump right into the demo at this point, and I'll pass the controls over to you, William, and let us know a little bit about what we're about to see and why this is important.
Absolutely. So hopefully we'll be able to see this in a second. And just to set this up, this is just a quick demo. So we say, you know, digital inclusion is not as hard as you think. And this demo is kind of to set up the fact that there are pretty simple things that we can do to test digital interfaces, the web, you know, mobile devices. It's such an asset and a resource, and we can pretty easily, with a few key changes or key considerations, make all of these digital interfaces accessible to everyone. And so here's a quick demo that's going to find some problems that you may or may not expect on a website that we found. Vaccinefinder.org seemed relevant to today's world. And so we'll just go ahead and jump in, and not to be intimidated by what we're talking about here. And so hopefully we'll come to the end, we'll see the differences of what, you know, you may have heard with all of the word soup or all of the acronyms that you may have heard regarding accessibility, and we'll try to disambiguate that, because we want to focus on users and what the user experience is like, and the rest can come later. So this is a quick demo that I recorded earlier, because it's always a good idea to record demos. So hopefully this will work just fine.
I'm at vaccinefinder.org, and I'm going to step through this interface in a couple of different ways. So first we'll just go through with a keyboard and mouse, and we'll see that we've got a form here for selecting a vaccine. And if I click on select the vaccine, it opens up a modal, and the modal has some filter radio buttons across the top for ages and a long list of checkboxes for the types of vaccines I might be interested in. So I'll go ahead and select some of those, click add for vaccines, and we'll see that we're back at the original form. We've got a location field that we fill in, so I'm going to type in Florida for that and go ahead and select that, and a search area for the number of miles away from the location I selected. click search for a vaccine. And on the left, we've got a list of results. On the right, we've got a map with pins on it, as we would see pretty typically. And if I select one of these stores from the list here, I'm going to be taken into a details page with things like the location, the contact information, the hours. So very simple. Took me about 30 seconds to do it with a mouse primarily. And now let's try doing the same thing with just a keyboard, which is something you should be able to do with any website. So we'll go ahead and try the same thing, and we'll tab. We will use space, arrow up and down. Pretty simple controls for activating and interacting with a page with a keyboard. So at the top of this form, we can see that there's a faint focus indicator for vaccines, and if I keep tabbing through the interface, it works as expected until all of a sudden, after the near this location field, we have nothing. And if I tab again, I don't know where my focus has gone. Tab again, and then finally, it shows up at the end of the map. So there seems to be some non-focusable elements in here, but I don't really know because my focus was gone. So we'll go ahead and select your vaccines and open that modal. I can tab through the radio buttons pretty well for selecting an age. And then once I get into this list of checkboxes, my focus disappears again. And I'm just going to hit space. And okay, so focus was in this list, but I didn't know where it was. So if I just keep tabbing through and pressing space, I can play guess and check with this to select my vaccines, but that's not advisable. So we'll go ahead and power through it with add 4 vaccines. Takes us back to the original form. Now we need to add our location with this location field. So I'm just going to start typing Florida and then tab a couple of times here, and then it just closed. So I did not press anything. I didn't press space or enter to confirm the location that I wanted from this autocomplete list, but it closed anyway. So I'll try that again because I really want to get to that 4th element there, and I tabbed through it, and this time it was kind and let me do it. So it's pretty unexpected. It seems to be based on the timing that I use. That time it collapsed again. So okay, that's not great, but we'll keep moving. The problem here with this search area combo box or drop down select control thing, and I can make an assumption that my focus is on it, and I will try it, and then I was correct. I've got the list of options here, and I would expect to be able to arrow up and down through these and change the option, and that doesn't seem to be happening as I arrow up and down here. But I'll go ahead and press space and see what happens. It's selected 50 miles. Great. Okay, so again, I can make some guesses here as to what's going on. It might be difficult to select exactly what I want, but at least I can make this thing work if I play around with it some. But I can't really do it accurately. So we'll go ahead and search for a vaccine. And on the left side, we're going to get a list of the results as we saw before. On the right side, we're going to get this map. So we will tab through the interface again. We're at the top of the page. And then I want to go into this list here, so I'm going to tab. Uh-oh, my focus has disappeared. Tab, yeah, now we're at the end of the map. So it looks like this entire list has been skipped and it's not in the focus order. So if I actually wanted to click on one of these results, one of these providers, to get hours or other kind of information like we saw on the details page, I can't do that with a keyboard. So it's a pretty simple example. It's not hard to test for keyboard accessibility like this, and it's really important to make sure that all the controls are functional, because the next use case I have is a screen reader user. And if you've never heard or used the screen reader before, it might be a little bit overwhelming, a little bit verbose, but the mechanisms are essentially the same. I'm just navigating the web page with a keyboard, but the screen reader is going to tell me things as I land on them. So each element needs to have useful information about it. So we'll go ahead and turn that on. I'm going to use non-visual desktop access, which is a Windows screen reader. It's free and open source, and there are built-in screen readers for all of the main operating systems. So that tone lets me know that NVDA is now running, and now I'm on the page and NVDA is going to try to start talking. So as I tab through it, it's going to read, and we can hear things that it's
Banner
saying.
landmark list, clickable find vaccine visited link,
Clickable list find vaccine.
clickable FAQ link,
Clickable FAQ link. So that's pretty expected. It's going to tell me what the name of it is, what the role is, and the value that's selected.
select your vaccines button,
So we'll go in here. We see that select your vaccines button is labeled effectively, and then I'll tab again. And I just have this element that just says button. So that's not great because I don't know what that button means. Let's go ahead and open the vaccine modal here.
Cancel button. All ages button. 03 MOS button. 4 MOS 6 YRS.
So as I tab through the interface here, it seems to make pretty good sense, and I will go ahead and go into the list of checkboxes.
90, 60, DT checkbox not checked. DTOP checkbox not checked. Hepatitis A, 18 plus, checkbox not checked. Space, checked.
So I can tab through these, I get the label, and it tells me if it's checked or not checked, so everything is working pretty well, actually better with a screen reader running than if I was just using the keyboard alone, because at least I know what these checkboxes are. So I'll select a few of them.
Space, checked. Add 3 vaccines button.
And then I'll go ahead and go down to the button and add 3 vaccines.
Space, hepatitis A, 18.
So it takes me back to the original form
Click
here.
Button.
So I'll tap to the interface
Banner
and
left
then
button.
Oh no.
Button. Button.
I hear a button, button, button. I have no idea what these things are.
Button.
And even worse, it's different from what I saw before. The screen reader experience is pretty similar to the keyboard experience throughout this entire interface. So let's go ahead and take a look and see what an automated scan is going to tell us. Went ahead and refreshed the page. I'm going to open up the select vaccines modal again so that we have something interesting to scan. And if you remember, we had all of the problems with finding those checkboxes. And then we should also have everything behind this element as well open. So let's go to the Axe tool. And to be clear, I think the Axe accessibility checker is great because it finds real problems and problems that should be fixed and doesn't have a lot of or any false positives. But we'll see what it actually tells us about this experience, which I hope I've demonstrated is not optimal. So we have 54 issues. 49 of the issues are related directly to elements must have sufficient color contrast, which possibly is true, but looking through this and doing some testing beforehand, what we actually saw and experienced does not have any significant color contrast problems. So the accessibility checker struggles with that if it's complex CSS or if there's background images or hidden elements that just need to be cleaned up. So it's worth checking into, but I don't think that it impacted our actual experience any. We have ARIA hidden equals true must not be present on the document body. Documents must have one main landmark. Zooming and scaling must not be disabled. Page must contain one level 1 heading, and ARIA element must not contain focusable elements. All of those are true and good suggestions that should be fixed on the page, but none of them had anything to do with unlabeled buttons, had anything to do with the keyboard control not working on that autocomplete field, and the weirdness that we experience with the search area drop down as well. So the types of issues that this automated checker are finding are not issues that, as a user just now, I actually experienced any impact at all trying to accomplish selecting a vaccine and moving through the process to find details about a pharmacy.
So the point of this demonstration was not to say that automated checkers are useless, but it's to reemphasize what we're talking about when we're talking about inclusion. We're talking about the actual user experience. And I think we've got some more interesting stuff to talk about in this talk, but I'll go ahead and pass it back to Andrew. I think who's going to advance the slide.
I will. Thanks. Thanks so much. Now, we'll open it up and bounce around a little bit here. And we're starting to run a little bit short on time. So I think maybe we can kind of mash together some of our thoughts around these notions of compliance and the culture of organizations that we've seen and worked with, and what kind of works here. Now, I was so taken aback by the discrepancy here between the automated tests and what we actually saw from an end user perspective. So, how do those things like balance out? How do we approach this problem in the right order?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, we've got all of these conformance standards, these guidelines for the web content accessibility guidelines, and that's all very important. But when it comes down to it with the reality of what we should be focusing on for the next sprint, understanding what a user experience looks like, I think we've got this, disparity between all of the possible conformance problems we could fix with accessibility and technical violations, and then what we're really experiencing from our users who are just trying to accomplish something. And I think we've got a cool slide that that kind of has a graph of really what we're talking about here, the difference between an accessibility conformance issue and a user goal, and what really matters most is the intersection between those two. And that's where we want to spend our time, especially when we're getting started with this.
For sure. I want to jump ahead a little bit to some design considerations because we talked a little bit about the kind of damage control approach to compliance. But at the earliest stages of a project, thinking about inclusivity is really key, so we can avoid some of these things. And Crispin, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how we can change our frame of reference to ensure we're not playing whack-a-mole later on fixing these kinds of issues.
All right, exactly. So incorporating accessibility considerations into your design process really starts at the beginning of the project. And note that this works best for new projects like site redesigns. If you have the luxury, it's you're starting fresh, right? But ideally, it even starts before the discovery phase, before the RFP goes out. But at this point, it's a good idea to define what the requirements are, right? It's really important that everyone on the team as well, whether they're content producers, designers, or developers, all have a basic knowledge of accessibility, because it's a very multi-layered thing to consider. So during discovery, this is where we want to define our user types and their goals. This is, it really sets the stage for the entire project. And it's also really critical to incorporate those user goals that identify accessibility concerns. So for example, we might have a user type or types that represent people with disabilities. And that gets both the design and the dev team and the client all on the same page about ensuring that adequate accommodations will be considered later on in the project. And sometimes the client already has a mandate, and they come to us and they'll say, okay, it needs to be Section 508 compliant, it needs to conform to WCAG 2.0 or 2.1 AA standards, and that's great. But sometimes they don't know that. So it's on us to educate and to see it as an opportunity to let them know about the importance of ensuring the site is accessible, and reassuring them that it doesn't mean that they can't have a beautiful website that's highly engaging and interactive, right? So then when we get into the design phase, which often includes content production, we begin to incorporate these considerations that we've previously defined. So for example, the content needs to be structured semantically, like I was talking about earlier, but you do this while it's still in Word or Gather Content or Google Docs, like thinking about it from the get-go. And then our wireframes are going to take into account things like menu structure and wayfinding. That's all part of it. And any important elements with interactivity. So obviously, once we get into the visual design, we're going to start looking at color contrast and UI elements, user interface elements, like inline links and active states or focus states, and progressive enhancement for any animations or transitions. And then, that's where we really work things out, right? We're prototyping our components, hopefully. That's another opportunity to test our designs. And whether it's a low fidelity clickable wireframe or a fully responsive HTML, CSS prototype, we can test with users to flag any potential issues before building them into the CMS. So really, while we can address most concerns without any additional cost or impact on the project timeline or budget, that's not to say there won't be challenges during implementation, right? Sometimes we have to use a third-party widget or a plugin, and that might not be accessible. So that can bring some problems. So then it becomes a conversation with the client about, what are the options and how are we going to deal with this? Maybe we can do it a different way to accomplish the same goals for our users and for the organization. Or maybe we need to, make some code changes or fixes to that plugin and, hopefully work with the maintainer to improve it for other users or other agencies or people using that tool. But hopefully, you've been doing this all the way along, so it's not going to be a problem you have to deal with at the end of the site after you've shipped it, after you've launched it, and then somebody comes and says, hey, I can't use your website. It's not accessible. because that's when it gets really expensive, really time consuming, and really challenging to fix, because you're having to undo everything that's been done potentially, and rebuild. So hopefully, you've been thinking about it all the way through, so you don't have to fix it at the end.
I want to be sensitive to time as well. We've got about I think 13 minutes left. There's some Q&A options. I think if there are any questions, please type them into the chat. We'll try and get to them. In advance of that, we'll keep rolling here and talk through a little bit more, what some of the implications are for organizations that we've seen, or how we might think about promoting this kind of like consciousness around approaching usability first, and kind of compliance second. What kind of cultural fabric? What's a good healthy kind of cultural mix for an organization to be having? Policies, people, like how does this work out in your experience, Tanner, to create the most successful products and the most successful web projects?
Yeah, I think knowledge transfer is important, but also to transfer of ownership. So when the most successful organizations, the most successful development agencies, the most successful companies and municipalities really have at least one internal evangelist who's driving this, who's holding up the standards that we choose to live by and create digital assets for that are inclusive. I think then once that happens, then when we start to build the team, that becomes infectious. But backing up a little bit further, it's also about strategic leadership, right? When we create the policies and processes, when we create the things that are in stone, this is who we are, this is what we do here. That's when, if turnover happens or new people come in, new developers, when they come into the environment, the designers, the content creators, everybody, when they understand what we do here and why we do it, it just becomes a part of the day-to-day. And so accessibility is no longer a back burner. It becomes integrated in the DNA of the process that we take every single day. That's I think how we do that.
So how do we get there? Like, what kind of steps need to be put in place you can't just like write a policy and be like, hey, we have an accessibility policy, right? There's a bit more to it than that, right? What other steps can organizations take to ensure that this is like a thoughtful and comprehensive approach?
Yeah, I think William does an incredible job at breaking things down and training teams on what they do. William, do you want to expand on that? Because you have a lot more experience within actually making what I say happen.
Right. I think what Crispin described is really where the core is, and we still have the slide up. So once we have that, it's either corporate sponsorship or some leader, someone who's driving the policy that we have set up. It's just a matter of getting started and planning for the future that these good practices will be developed. And there's a starting point that you can have. You can start training your developers to start testing with a keyboard. And if everyone just made sure that their websites worked with the keyboard, we'd be in really good shape. The next is there's simple things that we can do. Ensure alternative text is correct, ensure labels are properly associated, and use the platform conventions whenever possible. It's great to be creative and do wonderful and exciting things, but the underlying semantics, as we started the conversation with, needs to be solid, and there are platform conventions that we can stick to from there. And then once we have that in place, we can start building more custom, more interesting accessibility solutions. But before that, getting the core concepts is not that difficult. There's tons of resources that are available.
culture shift can be hard sometimes, you know, like Crispin, I don't know how do you deal with it when like someone's like, hey, we really want this like this amazing slideshow like that has all this flair, and they're, you know, the expectations are maybe you know, not bias against accessibility in some cases. How do we have that conversation?
Oh, or like the auto playing full screen video, background video with no pause or play controls. Yeah, I mean, these are conversations, and we have to have frank discussions with the people who are asking for these things to, as I said earlier, educate them on the impacts, because people don't always know that there's a better way, or that there's a workaround, or that there's another way to accomplish that goal. So it's an opportunity, most of the way I see it, to be more creative, to think about how we can provide that experience that you know, that marketing manager wants to, you know, get that flashy impact. But how can we accomplish the same goal in a way that everyone can gain the benefits of the message that's being, you know, put out there? Ultimately, websites are either about conveying information or about accomplishing a task. So let's, you know, try to steer the conversation back to that and doing the best job we can at that to achieve the goals for those users, which will ultimately achieve the goals for that institution or that organization.
And
Yeah,
once,
I thought William said, you know, something really enlightening for me the other day, which is that digital inclusion doesn't have to be a thing that like limits creativity. Rather, digital inclusion is a way to maybe enhance or promote creativity. How did you say that, William?
Yeah, essentially, it's an opportunity to understand what is the best for users. And when we are thinking about all of our users, more often than not, everyone is going to benefit from being inclusive, right? So we are re-examining, like Crispin said, what are the actual goals we want here? Let's not get caught up in something that we think is cool or flashy or whatever. But in this, on the other hand, we also aren't limited by, you know, thinking that we have to have a website that is just, you know, black and white text and completely static, because we can think creatively about ways to solve for inclusion to ensure that assistive technologies can access the same information that we want everyone else to access as well. And good usability is good usability.
I think it's also important to recognize that there's no one way to do everything, like any given thing. So every client or every project we work on is a little different, even though effectively most of them are just websites. They do the same basic things, but it's a fresh challenge every time. And there are different ways to accomplish those goals. So, you know, it might not be necessary to make everything black and white to be super high contrast. Or maybe there's a mode for some users that they can toggle to have that black and white high contrast experience. And there's a different version of the site, you know, a different experience for those who want the full rich or subtle color palette. There's usually a way. It's just a question of, you know, commitment to ensuring that we're providing an equitable experience. And hopefully, you know, we're working with an organization who has that as part of their mandate, and it's one of their goals too.
Yeah, very interesting. We have I think a question, reads a little bit like a statement. So we'll see. I'll throw it to the team and see if anyone wants to tackle it. So there's a comment about maybe it makes sense to develop a special page for people with disabilities instead of making a universal one. In this case, this page can have a fully different design.
I mean, how is that any different than blacks only, whites only? So that's not really inclusive, you know. And why would you put forth the effort to create something that is accessible somewhere else when you could just create the original asset that's accessible?
Yeah, as a practice, we don't recommend totally replacing an interface. We think about progressive enhancements to to a site. I mean, what Tanner is saying is true, and that's how a completely separate interface that you set aside for blind people, for example, can be interpreted. So progressive enhancement to what is there is always the best decision, and then alternatives where absolutely necessary. But what happens when you want to make an update to your site and then you have to go and update the accessible version as well? So, Amazon for a long time had an accessible version of their website, and it was horrible because it didn't keep up to date with the normal Amazon.com. And then finally, this was many years ago. Amazon is doing fine now, but finally they have eliminated that, and Amazon.com is now fully accessible. So people with disabilities who are using assistive technology get an equivalent experience.
Especially when resources are limited. There were a lot of like M. websites for a long time. Many of those have disappeared as mounting costs. So very, very cool. And just, this idea of compliance, which has become, firstly, I mean, we have to just commend the community generally for taking this more seriously. And that's all great. But I think just to kind of summarize a little bit, if I may, what we're really talking about here is, by not putting compliance first, we're focused on achieving greater outcomes, right? And automated tests are really fantastic for helping to identify things, but they don't give us the full picture. And if all we're looking to do are check some boxes and make sure that we're compliant, it doesn't guarantee that we're going to have a truly accessible and usable website, that we're going to achieve those ultimate goals of accessibility, which are to ensure that we have our message delivered to everyone. Organizations, sometimes they'll put these, the requirements are in there, the automated tests get passed, and then they feel like they're protected from a drive-by lawsuit. But at the end of the day, what we're advocating for here in this conceptual space and this process is to focus on usability. It's like they say, if you focus on the game, the score will kind of take care of itself, right? If you're focused on the clock and looking at the score, then maybe your game is just not going to be as great, right? Speaking of the clock, we're coming up at the time. I want to thank everyone. Provide some additional resources for any who are interested in learning more. William spoke about NVDA. There are other tools and processes. Oh, that was cool. We have a hard stop at 6:30, so we can go over a little bit. So we've put together a little guide if you like to gain some additional insight in resources that are available to you. It's available at bit.ly/A11y-tips.-s. Please connect with us. We have email and social media accounts. We'd love to continue this conversation as we move forward into the year. We would have loved to do a little bit more boffing on this topic. Perhaps we can find some other space. Come join us at a future conference. We'll be sure to keep talking about these issues. We have a little more time. I see people here. If you've got questions, please throw them into the Zoom chat, and we'll do our best to address them, or comments, if you will. But as we have a little more time, what kind of processes specifically, for developer and developer management, William, do you think can be reinforced or put in place? How does an organization, kind of start with developer education work in these spaces?
That's an excellent question, and there's an organization called Teach Access, which is focused on ensuring that the education that developers receive in part of higher education includes topics like this, and so that when developers are prepared coming out of with their degree and they enter the workforce, the idea with this organization that we work with as well and contribute to is that people will be more prepared by default. But for people that are in the workforce now, we encourage people to try it. The demo that we did hopefully wasn't that scary. And there are things that you can do as a developer to just get started. And it's tough to say emulate what a user is having, because that might give you the wrong impression. But you can turn on a screen reader, you can hear what it's saying, you can do a quick tutorial and do a little bit of testing yourself. Give yourself an hour or two to do that. And if you get overwhelmed, there are resources. There are resources that you can connect with us, with Kalamuna, and with AFB, and other resources on the web to learn more about it. But just taking the first step and really getting the empathy of why we're making these subtle changes. And I say subtle changes because most of the time we don't need major visual redesigns to be accessible. Most of the time we're talking about keyboard accessibility. How does the focus move through the website? Are my labels properly associated? That sort of thing. And there's some pretty simple checklists we can start with, and then we can go all the way into a deep dive into the web content accessibility guidelines, which are very comprehensive if there are more questions. So I think just getting started.
I want to expand on that a little bit, William, because for people to take home and apply, understand exactly where they're at. Do you think it'd be beneficial for them to either just, two keystrokes, right? Start at the top of the website, tab,
Yep.
and hit enter. Fill out
Yep.
a form, press enter. See what interactive elements sound like, feel like to someone who can't see them.
Absolutely. That's all it takes is to get started. And there's a couple keystrokes that you learn. And then, if you fix all of the keyboard accessibility issues, like we said earlier, then that's a whole domain of problems that someone is not going to have. And anybody can do that.
Really great.
I think one of the things about screen readers, like AFB, B stands for blind, right? But there's a purpose that William's hinting at for why we test with a screen reader, because it's not just for screen readers, right? It's for people who maybe have a mobility impairment or they use eye gaze technology. William, do you want to share briefly a little bit about that, why we would test with a screen reader?
Yeah, that's a great point, and I wish we had a lot more time to talk about all of this. But the screen reader use case is interesting because if you have all of the semantics, again, that's a great word, I love it, correct on the page, then assistive technologies, and assistive technology is a whole class of devices and software that people might be using. In fact, to the point where we need to know nothing about the user to make our product compatible with assistive technologies. So I don't need to know that you're using a screen reader because a screen reader is one type of assistive technology. But if we follow platform conventions, we make our product keyboard accessible. We put the labels in the correct place. People who are using Braille, a refreshable Braille display, it's something that runs off of the screen reader. And so people who are deafblind can also then access your site. If you make it fully keyboard accessible, then someone who's using switches that don't have the mobility to use a keyboard or even a mouse can use that because their assistive technology emulates a keyboard. So we use the screen reader as the case for accessibility because it covers the most of those domains, where if it's working with the screen reader, it's also going to be working with a lot of other assistive technologies as well. So that's the reason why we start the conversation with the keyboard and then move into the screen reader.
Fantastic. Well, we're at the end of the day. I'm thankful everyone is still here and hopefully paying attention. I know I've been very stimulated by this conversation and the possibility, and an opportunity for change and improvement, you know, in a fundamental way across our product teams. I just want to thank everyone for paying attention, for, you know, just doing the work that you do as well. I think if you're here today, it's because you care about this topic. You want to improve the way that you do things. You want to help other people improve the way that they're building things to be inclusive, and that is a really valuable task. And so I just want to thank everyone, and keep doing the great work, and love to keep the conversation going.
It means the world to me.
Yes.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your presentation and being the last one of the day. It doesn't look like we have any more questions, and thanks for those who decided to share in comments. So without further ado, have a good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.